I was 18 when it happened. Old enough to think I was invincible, but young enough to still believe that fear was something you could power through with bravado. At the time, I lived with my parents in a sleepy, well-kept suburb just outside of Washington, D.C. It wasn't the kind of place you'd expect anything strange to happen. Our house was a big 3-story colonial, painted a pale gray with white trim, and it sat at the very end of a quiet cul-de-sac. The left side of the house had a wide wooden deck, and underneath that deck was a basement door. From there, a granite rock staircase led down to the backyard. The backyard itself wasn't your standard flat grass patch. It sloped steeply, maybe 30 degrees, all the way down to a narrow but energetic creek. The kind of place where, in the daytime, you'd hear birdsong and the gurgle of water. At night, though, it was a wall of shadows and a constant quiet rush, like white noise from the dark. It was the summer after my senior year of high school, and in just a few months, I'd be shipping off to Marine Corps boot camp. My parents were going out of town for a week. You can probably guess what happened next. The party wasn't just a party, it was a full-on rager. Word spread faster than I expected. At some point, a local metal band showed up with their gear and started playing in the living room, which should have been chaos, but somehow fit the mood perfectly. People were packed into every corner, on the deck, in the kitchen, sprawled on the basement couches. The air was thick with sweat, cheap beer, and cigarette smoke. By 3 in the morning, things had quieted down. Most of the guests had crashed out in various spots around the house. Only 3 of us were still awake, me, Heather, and Amber. We stepped out onto the deck for a smoke, the boards cool under our feet, the summer night heavy with humidity. From there, you could see most of the slope in our backyard and over the low wooden fence, only about 3 feet high, into my neighbor's yard. They had one of those carefully landscaped rock gardens, tiered with 2-foot drops leading down for about 20 feet, with a small wooden pagoda in the middle. Standing a few feet from the fence on their side was a stone statue, a weathered 3-foot-tall angel, the kind with folded wings and downcast eyes. I'd always thought it looked like something out of Doctor Who. It faced down toward their hill, like it was watching over the garden. We were talking lazily about nothing when I heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming up the rock path under the deck. The path was dark, pitch black, and I didn't want to flip on the floodlights for fear of waking the neighbors. Assuming it was someone from the party leaving late, I leaned over the railing and called softly, "Drive safe." The footsteps stopped instantly. "Good night to you too," I called out, half joking. Silence. A minute passed, then 2. The footsteps didn't start again, and no one answered. The quiet began to feel oppressive, the kind that makes the hairs on your arms stand up. Amber finally called out, "Are you okay?" Then I went inside, grabbed a flashlight, and came back out. I shined the beam under the deck, across the stone steps, into the shadows. I asked Heather and Amber if they'd heard anyone walk away. They both shook their heads. That's when Heather froze and pointed toward the neighbor's yard. "The statue," she said quietly. "It's turned." I looked. She was right. The angel, which had been facing down the hill, was now angled slightly toward us. Not fully facing us, but enough that it was noticeable. We stared at it, the 3 of us silent now. The night air felt heavier somehow. I lit another cigarette, trying to shake it off, but my eyes kept going back to the statue. Then it moved. Not subtly, not something we could write off as imagination. The statue pivoted, just a few more degrees, but clearly, deliberately, turning its head and shoulders more toward us. We all saw it. "What the?" I started to say, but was cut off by the sound of loud, heavy footsteps charging up the stone stairs again. I swung the flashlight beam down. Nothing. I turned the light toward the statue again. It had rotated nearly 90 degrees now, facing us head-on. That's when we heard the new sound, squelching, crunching footsteps. They were coming from the narrow strip of ground between our stone steps and the neighbor's fence. That little garden patch was only about 8 feet wide. I forced a laugh, trying to calm them down. "I'm gonna check it out." Heather and Amber insisted they were coming with me. They didn't want to be left alone. We went out the front door, moving slowly down the side of the house toward the backyard. Before we even rounded the corner, we heard it again, the footsteps. But this time they were running away from us, down the hill. There was nowhere to go down there except into the dense woods in the creek. Our house was at the farthest end of the cul-de-sac. We reached the spot where we'd heard the crunching. I shined the light into the trees. Nothing. Then I swung the beam toward the fence. The statue was facing us completely now. I stepped closer to the fence, careful not to trip on the uneven ground. Heather grabbed my arm. Wait. Look, I looked down. Massive boot prints. Not just big, huge, like something a man the size of Shaquille O'Neal would wear. The prints led toward the statue and stopped. One of them overlapped the fence post. Not next to it, around it, like something had stepped through the solid wood without breaking it. My courage hit its limit. Run! We bolted for the front of the house, slamming the door behind us, and didn't stop until we were upstairs in my bedroom. We stayed there for half an hour, whispering, trying to come up with any logical explanation. Nothing fit. Then it hit me. I hadn't locked the front door. I forced myself to go downstairs. The house was silent, the kind of quiet where you can hear your own heartbeat. I locked the door, turned around, bang! It came from outside, a deep, solid thud against one of the deck's support columns, like someone had slammed a shoulder or a heavy object into it. That was it. I flipped on every floodlight we had, not caring if the neighbors woke up, and sprinted back upstairs. We stayed up the rest of the night. No more footsteps, no more bangs. But we didn't relax until the first pale streaks of sunlight started cutting through the trees and the mist over the creek began to burn away. When we finally went outside to check in daylight, everything was normal. The statue was back in its original position, facing down the hill. There were no footprints, not even ours from the night before. I lived in that house for a few more months before leaving for the Corps. My parents still live there, and nothing like that has happened since. Not to them, and not to anyone else we've told. But I've never forgotten it. I've seen plenty of strange things in my years since. Military deployments have a way of putting you in some eerie situations. But nothing has unnerved me like that night on the deck, with the angel that moved and the footsteps that never left tracks. And sometimes when I'm visiting home and step out on that deck at night, I find my eyes drifting toward the neighbor's yard. The statue is still there. I was 10 years old the night it happened. It was summer and I was staying over at my friend Jason's house. His family had one of those big backyards that seemed to go on forever, with a wooden fence running along the back and a scattering of tall trees that cast long shadows at night. Near the far end of the yard, between two of those trees, his dad had built a small tree house, more like a raised platform with walls and a roof, just big enough for 2 kids and a couple of sleeping bags. That night, Jason's dad told us we could sleep out there if we wanted. It felt like an adventure. We dragged out our sleeping bags, a couple of flashlights, and some snacks, then climbed up the wooden ladder into our little fort. From up there, we had a clear view of the yard, the garage about 30 feet away, and the tree line beyond. The night started like any other summer sleepover, whispered jokes, flashlight games, and plans about what we'd do the next day. The air was still warm, the kind of thick summer heat that sticks to your skin. Somewhere in the distance, crickets chirped in a steady, hypnotic rhythm. Eventually, we both drifted off to sleep. I don't know what time it was when my eyes opened again, but later I'd guess it was around 3 or 4 in the morning. The night air was cooler now, and everything was still. I woke up lying on my right side, facing the garage, and she was there. A woman standing completely still in the grass between the treehouse and the garage, maybe 30 feet from me. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but the longer I stared, the clearer she became. She wasn't just a shadow or a trick of the moonlight. She was glowing. It wasn't a blinding light, more like the soft, shimmering blue of a tropical ocean, with a faint white halo around her edges. The light didn't spill onto the grass or cast shadows. It seemed to belong only to her, as if it came from within. She was tall, much taller than any adult I'd ever seen in real life, and broad in the shoulders. Her head was tilted slightly to one side, like she was listening to something I couldn't hear. Her eyes were closed. She wore a long, flowing robe or dress that brushed the ground, the fabric shifting in a breeze I couldn't feel. It was plain, without patterns, but the folds and drape of it looked real. not some blurry dream image. The style was old, centuries old. The closest thing I could compare her to, though I didn't make the connection until years later, was the Virgin Mary statues you sometimes see in old churches. I'm not saying that's what she was, but her clothing, her posture, even the expression on her face reminded me of those images. Serene, solemn, almost sorrowful. Her hands were held together in front of her, not clasped tightly but gently resting, as though in prayer. She didn't move, not a shift, not a breath. I lay frozen, my cheek pressed against the fabric of my sleeping bag, my eyes locked on her. My mind was racing, but my body refused to move. I didn't think about waking Jason. I didn't even call out. Looking back, I don't know why. Maybe I thought if I made a sound, she would notice me. I just watched her. It felt like minutes. It could have been longer. There was no sound except for the faint buzz of insects in the distance. Even the crickets had gone quiet, as though the night itself was holding its breath. My heart was beating so hard it felt like it might wake Jason anyway. At some point, I realized I couldn't keep looking at her. I didn't know what she was or why she was there, but my 10-year-old brain decided the safest thing to do was pretend it wasn't happening. So I closed my eyes. It took every ounce of willpower not to open them again. I kept telling myself, if I can just go back to sleep, she'll be gone when I wake up. When I opened my eyes again, it was early morning. Pale sunlight was filtering through the leaves above the treehouse, and Jason was still asleep next to me. The spot where she had stood was empty, just grass in the shadow of the garage. There was nothing out of place, nothing to suggest anyone had been there. I didn't tell Jason, I don't know why. Maybe I thought he wouldn't believe me, or maybe I was afraid saying it out loud would somehow make it real. The image of her never left me though. I can still see her even now, 17 years later, as vividly as if I had seen her yesterday. The faint glow, the tilt of her head, the way her robe seemed to ripple, though the air was still. It was the only paranormal experience I've ever had in my life. I've never seen anything before or since that compares, but I know what I saw that night, and I'll never forget it. People love to come up with excuses when you tell them you've seen something strange. Oh, you must have been watching a scary movie, they'll say. Your mind was just playing tricks on you. But this was different. I wasn't scared out of my wits from a horror flick. I wasn't tired, and I wasn't imagining things. I know exactly what I saw, and all these years later, I can still picture her. I was 15 at the time, living in a quiet residential neighborhood in Silver Spring, Maryland. Our house was a modest 2-story place with a long, narrow backyard, shaded by 3 massive oak trees. Their roots had pushed up through the soil over decades, and in fall, the ground would vanish under a thick carpet of brittle leaves. Even in summer, a breeze could send a faint crunch through the yard. It was a Saturday afternoon, early spring. The sun was out, and a cool breeze was moving through the trees. My cousin Eric had come over to hang out, and my younger brother Daniel was lounging on his bed across the room. We were in my bedroom upstairs, sprawled on the floor, watching Dumb and Dumber on an old TV propped on a shaky dresser. The bedroom window overlooked the backyard. It was one of those sliding windows with the screen half torn, and if you leaned close enough, you could smell the faint, earthy scent of leaves and damp wood. About halfway through the movie, I heard it, this soft, steady crunching sound coming from outside, leaves being stepped on. At first, I didn't think much of it. Our backyard attracted all sorts of critters, squirrels, raccoons, sometimes even a fox, so I figured it was nothing unusual. Then it came again. Crunch, crunch. Slower this time, heavy. Too heavy for a squirrel or even a raccoon. Eric glanced at me. You hear that? I nodded and leaned toward the window. From my vantage point, I could see most of the yard, and that's when I noticed her. A girl. She was walking slowly across the backyard, headed toward the left side of the house. I could only see her from behind. She wore faded blue jeans and a loose blue sweater that swayed just slightly as she moved. Her hair was long, black, and straight, reaching almost to the middle of her back. What struck me first was how normal she looked. This wasn't some pale, translucent figure in a flowing white dress. She didn't glow or hover or flicker. She was solid, moving naturally, like any other person would. Eric saw her too. "Who the hell is that?" he whispered. I didn't answer. I was already trying to figure it out. We didn't know anyone who would just wander into our backyard in the middle of the day, and there was no way she could have come in through the back gate. It was locked from the inside with a padlock, the kind you needed a key for. She kept walking, heading for the narrow space between our house and the fence that led toward the front yard. I figured I'd catch her on the other side, maybe see her leave. My curiosity outweighed any sense of alarm. I honestly didn't feel scared yet. So I darted out of the bedroom, bolted down the stairs 2 at a time, and cut through the living room to the side window that faced the wooden gate. This was the only way she could get out without going through the house. The gate stood closed, its padlock dangling, untouched. But she wasn't there. No sound of footsteps, no rustle of clothing, just the quiet hum of a passing car on the street out front. Frowning, I ran to the front door, yanked it open, and stepped outside. The afternoon air hit me, cool but with that faint warmth of spring. I scanned up and down the street. Empty, not a soul walking by, no neighbor's car pulling away, no one stepping onto a porch. I jogged back around to the backyard, thinking maybe she'd turned around. But the yard was empty too. No movement, no sound. The leaves that had crunched under her feet just minutes before were still and undisturbed. Eric and Daniel had followed me out. "Where'd she go?" Eric asked, looking around. I shook my head. I don't know. She was just here." We searched the whole yard, even checked behind the shed, where the shadows pooled thick and cool. Nothing. It was like she'd just vanished into thin air. And that's when it hit me. She couldn't have gone anywhere. There was no open gate, no hole in the fence, no time for her to have walked all the way around the house without us seeing. The realization sent a strange chill through me, one that didn't come from the breeze. "She's gone," Daniel said, his voice small. We went back inside and I sat on my bed, staring out the window where I'd first seen her. My brain tried to come up with explanations. Maybe she was the neighbor's kid? But no, I'd lived here long enough to know every face on this street, and I'd never seen her before. Over the next hour, I kept replaying the moment in my head. Her slow walk, the way her sweater moved, the dark shine of her hair in the daylight. The thing that unsettled me most was how real she'd looked. I'd always imagined ghosts as shadowy, distorted, or pale, but she could have passed for an ordinary teenager just wandering through. I never saw her face. That somehow made it worse. That night I barely slept, my mind going over every possible explanation, but none of them fit. There was no way she could have left that yard without passing one of us. Years later, I still think about her sometimes. I'm 27 now, and I've never had another experience like that. No flickering lights, no whispers in the dark, no strange figures in the corner of my eye. Just that one girl in broad daylight, walking through my backyard like she belonged there. Then gone in an instant. People still give me the same old line when I tell them. Maybe it was just your imagination. But I know it wasn't. And the weirdest part? I wasn't scared while it was happening. It was only later, when I realized there was no logical way she could have left, that the fear settled in. That's when I knew. Whatever I saw that afternoon in Silver Spring wasn't a regular person. I don't know who she was. I don't know what she wanted, but I'll never forget her.